What's happening, guys? Today I got another Ford quick tip for you, and it's in the 2006 Ford Explorer and Mercury Mountaineer, both the V6 and the V8 applications. And what it has to do with is these trans cooler lines that everybody loves to hate on these vehicles, and just when you should replace them and why you should replace them. Now, before I get too involved in telling you exactly why you should be changing these out and when, I want to tell you a little backstory that got me to this point. I've changed a lot of radiators out on the 2006 through 2010 Ford Explorers, and as everybody knows, they're very prone to leaking from the top crimps, where the top tank and the bottom tank are, and that's because they're running such a high pressure in those systems on there. Most of the Ford vehicles up until that point are running 16 PSI. Might be some weirdos out there running 18 PSI in the model lineup, but 20 PSI back in 06 was definitely something new. So they had a lot of problems with the tanks leaking on there, and they revised the radiator a couple of times. Well, the radiator is very, very expensive. It's around $400 to $500 for a radiator. It's more expensive than any other Ford, OEM-based radiator for just about any other vehicle, except, let's say, the Super Duties with the diesels in there. It's huge. So, needless to say, a lot of people go aftermarket, and I support that. I'd rather go with OEM, but I always do give the option to go aftermarket for my customers. Now, what I recommend is the Spectra Premium radiators because they're built stronger and they definitely have a good track record with me. Whereas the TYC and other off-brands tend to come back and have failures because they cannot handle the pressure. You'll actually see when you get the radiator from TYC or another cheap brand, it'll actually come with a new cap on it that's, I think, 18 or 16 PSI on it. That's not the way the system was designed. The engine and the cooling system was designed from Ford at the factory. On the Spectra Premiums and, of course, the Ford radiators, they come with no radiator cap, which means, hey, as long as the pressure tests just fine, swap over the stock OEM cap that runs at 20 PSI. Now, why am I telling you all this? Well, a lot of my customers, they tend to go the cheapest route. Now, the TYCs can be $100.50, whereas the Spectra Premium is around $225, and like I said, the Ford radiators are around $400 to $500. So I put in a couple of TYCs or other brands because they wanted to save the money. They didn't have the money at the time, and it was leaking pretty bad. And guess what? Over and over again, they come back leaking, and we're having to change them out over and over again. And that's what happened with this particular customer. And the second time around, because there was no warranty on his TYC, he went with the Spectra Premium. Now, the other issue is on his original TYC radiator that he got changed out, it had trans cooler leaks also, and it was from the fitting, the quick connect line that goes into the fitting at the bottom of the radiator. There's an internal cooler for the transmission inside the radiator. So he wanted to just change these fittings out. Now, Ford does not make these fittings. Of course, they sell the radiator as a complete unit. Well, Dorman, they're like an OE solution type deal. They came out with new fittings, so you can change them out if they're leaking and just change the problem that you're having. The problem is the TYC radiator, again, had another change to its design, and the threads on there were not a 1.5 thread pitch, which is a more coarse thread pitch, which is the factory thread pitch from the Ford radiators. They went with like a 1.25 thread pitch. So needless to say, all the guy wanted to do was change his fitting out for his trans cooler leak, and he had to buy a whole new radiator. And that brings me to my next point. When I say to get the Spectra Premium, it's for more than one reason. And there's cooler reasons, and there's, of course, is the end tanks being crimped a little bit better and not having leak issues. Now, there's one note on that. The Spectra Premiums do have the correct thread pitch, okay, but they don't have a double O-ring inside of there to keep it sealed. Now, you got to remember, the line comes in, it sticks into there, right, and it quick connects. That's it. Well, it does have a little support bracket around so it doesn't blow off of there, but otherwise, this thing's shaking going on the road. So the more O-rings inside of there, the better. And the Spectra Premiums still only include one O-ring inside of there. Now you can either wait till later and then change it out with the Dorman units that have double O-rings in them, are built a lot better. Or if you're changing the radiator because you bought the cheap TYC or off-brand and now you're going to a Spectra Premium or OEM, now is the time to change them over to Dorman units. And the reason being is that tank that's inside of there, and the bottom tank on there for the transcooler, that's just kind of floating in there. Only thing that's holding it and keeping the coolant from the radiator from getting into those transcooler fittings on there is the fittings themselves. They have an O-ring right here, and then there's some thread sealant. So it's best to change these out and put them back in while the radiator is brand new and dry. And I'll show you how that looks here in a second, and it'll be a light bulb moment. Obviously, you want to change it out while it's brand new and dry. Okay, so without any more yakking, I'm going to give you a nice close-up view of exactly how the new Dorman fittings look on the inside. You'll see the double O-rings. They're both backed inside of there. And then I'll show you me changing the fittings out on a brand new radiator, and I'll show you exactly why you want to change them out while it's new and dry. So take a look. And here's a close-up of that Dorman unit. You can see inside of there it has a double O-ring setup with a backer around each one of them, so it supports the O-ring from blowout. And of course, double O-ring is always a good idea, especially when you're in a position like that where it can vibrate going down the road and cause leaks because there's pressure going through here. So this is still a good idea to get, even though you're getting a new radiator with new fittings on it, because this one has that double O-ring setup in there to prevent any kind of leaks in the future. And also, like in that TYC, like I was saying, the threads on there were so fine that I couldn't even use this in there to fix the concern. I had to go get a Spectra Premium, which is a good radiator, but they still had a single O-ring setup. So we're going to change these out since they're bought already. And the Spectra Premiums had the 1.5 thread on here, so these screw right into there. A little bit of thread sealant, and you got the O-ring on there already, and you're set to go. Now is the time to put them on there before there's any coolant in the radiator. And this is the way to do it. We have a brand new radiator, no coolant inside of there, everything's nice and clean. And we're going to take the stock fitting off of there, and I'll show you why here in a second. Get it off of here. And you can see inside of here, it has a single O-ring setup inside of there, which is the same reason why the TYC failed. But the TYC had those fine threads, and this one has the same threads as the factory Ford ones, which is what these Dormans are made for. They're made to fix a factory Ford radiator. So these will thread right into here, no problem. And between this having a double O-ring, nice setup like this, and then the Spectra Premium radiator, we should have a good setup here for a long, long time. So the way I do this is it has an O-ring in the back side of it already. Put a little bit of thread sealant on there. I'll link to all this stuff down below and these fittings and all that stuff. Put a nice little layer on there. And the reason why I want to do this now is because look at this whole thing's loose inside of here. It's just another radiator basically inside of this plastic end tank on here. So we'll put this stuff on here now, and while it's dry, there's no chance of any cross contamination. And we'll thread it in there. And the fittings on here are 1 16 inches. I don't think there's any torque spec on here, but you'll know when it's tight or not. Just make sure when you use the wrench, you're halfway in the middle of it, not the end of it holding onto it and cranking down on it. You are going to crack the tank on here. So just put it down the middle and snug it up, and that's all it needs. Right there, it just bottomed out, so give it a little bit more. Right there. And we're set to go. This one's already on. And also in the Spectra Premiums, they have the same style drain cock on here as the Ford unit also. So that's another thing to note on these.